Recording. We are in record mode. So here's what we're going to do tonight. This is basically the final process in 801. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a series of questions that I want to get into having you discuss as it relates to each one of these questions. So in order to do that, before we get started, what I want to make sure that you remember, particularly as you think about this from a team point of view. Hang on, I just want to move this around a bit. So that really, what you were doing was, in this class, is really working around somewhat confused, because I'm getting all those children in the background are coming through. So if you could mute, I don't know who it is. Yes, that was it. Okay, thank you. So what we're doing is basically, this is it, is that what you've gone through over the last 10 weeks is really to get your team to begin to think about how you create a prototype. And we did use your view of looking at creating a new learning environment that really is going to stimulate the ability of all the learners, and actually the adults who are also learners within that system, to really be able to live sustainably and to find their passions for learning, so lifelong learning can come together. And that you were drawing from 800, your 801 course, obviously, and 845. Now, I have you guys this next quarter for 802. So because generally 802 comes before the 801, even though numerically it's not appropriate, and that's the one dealing with technology. So we are going to revisit your prototype a little bit when you get into 802 this summer. But what you're really going to do is, in what I really want to focus on tonight, is this idea of design thinking and the concept of creativity. So really what you were playing around with is looking at how design thinking and creativity interacts with systems, interacts with theory U, and eventually, by the end of the summer, how it interacts with the concepts that we will be discovering as it relates to technology. And that really, as you think about the process that you went through, a lot of discovery, looking at a lot of information, a lot of interpretation in relationship to the team, beginning to play around with the idea of ideation, doing some experimentation by brainstorming, trying to develop the prototype, and then the evolution of this, actually for this particular class, will possibly emerge a little bit more in 802. And when you get into that course, you'll see what I'm talking about. So tonight, really, your task now is to reflect on how this team really explored the ideas related to design thinking and creativity. But more importantly, what I want you to do a lot of thinking about is what you learned about your leadership style to creativity, how that came about, what discussions were taking place. Obviously, you know, I'll be looking at your reflective comments, but to me, this becomes important. So I'm going to pose 4 questions, and we'll spend about 10 minutes on each of these questions, and I want all of you to chime in on these questions. So as they come up, I really want you to do the discussion about this, because actually what you're going to help me to do and help further classes, future classes down the line, is that I generally take a lot of your concepts and ideas and begin to explore how to make the class better, how to make things work. So what you're going to do tonight, in one aspect, is helping me to do a little bit more research into this process of your own learning and what you see design thinking and creativity is all about. So with that, here's the first question that I'm going to pose to you is that what did you learn from the relationships among the content that was found in 800, that should be 845, it used to be 625, and 801 as you developed your design. So how did systems thinking, how did Theory U and what you were learning about design thinking really begin to interact in relationship to the product and your prototype that you were creating?
I'll go first answering that, if that's okay.
Sure.
I just think it just helped me think, just the readings that we've had the last 2 quarters just made me completely think outside the box and realize there's always other solutions to something. And it just helped me realize that traditional schooling is not the answer in the future, especially that WebEx, that TED Talk that you had us watch. You posted that to watch before this. That was exactly. That is, just to be on the forefront of that educational change and to realize that we are thinking on the forefront, that really helped, I think, our team design our future school.
Okay. Hey, others.
I'll go. This is Stacy. I think pretty much everything that we talked about in 800 about the iterative nature of leadership, I think played a lot to this design too, because we kept reflecting, we would think about something, come up with an idea, talk about it, and then go back a week later and reflect on it. And so I think when I think about leadership in general and sort of the roles I play, and then particularly in relation to design and leadership, that concept constantly came back.
Okay.
I think this is Carrie.
Okay, sorry.
I'm sorry. When I was thinking about when we were designing, and even, we met so many times, and what would happen is we would start talking, and it's so easy to fall back into what we're comfortable with, what we know, what we've kind of been trained to just accept as the norm. And, what we learned, especially with, Theory U, is that you have to keep working to go to not let yourself kind of fall backwards. And it became, this very intentional, no, we can't use this word because this word has these connotations with it. And we have to change the word because of the inherent meanings that have been associated with it. And it became, you start to think intentionally and changing the way, not just how you're thinking, but how you want everyone to reflect upon what you're doing.
Okay.
This is Patty. This kind of piggybacks on what Nicole was saying, but that whole disconnect about our beliefs and our practices, and that was in the video that you just had us watch, but that really came to the forefront with me, and kind of that going back to the old patterns, that even though we believe all these things about how kids learn, we're not putting it into practice. And that just keeps coming out over and over again to me. And another thing this quarter that was a follow-up from last time, the last 2 quarters with the creativity and innovation, is that part of bringing it to the doing stage where the action happens. And that's always been a personal struggle for me, that I am very creative. I come up with a lot of good ideas, but not everything always comes to fruition, and bringing it to that follow-through stage. And so I think that's really come to the forefront for me. And as we're talking about all these ideas with our design and not following into those old patterns, but how, and I know that some of the constraints were gone for this class activity, in that we don't have to worry about policy and assessments and whatnot, so the sky's the limit. But then thinking about how we can actually transfer that into our daily jobs and make those small changes happen within the confines of our current system that we all know needs to change, but that, like you were talking about before, how we have to start talking to policymakers and legislators and come together and figure out how we can slowly make that happen so it's not overwhelming. Because I think we can see what we want to happen, but we can get bogged down by how overwhelming it all is when you think about the picture.
Okay. Any other thoughts on this particular question?
And I think through all the readings and the people you've introduced us to and the different formats, platforms that are now existing, I've been really inspired by all the change that's starting to come out and all that we can do. And I think being a part of this cohort and trying to put that theory into practice has made it really exciting, and I'm really just looking forward to continuing on learning with my cohort. And I feel like so close to everyone, even though we're so far away. And so by doing all this virtually, it reinforces how much you can do virtually and how the future of education can really be so impactful in that way.
Okay. Any other comments?
I'm just going to piggyback on what Jody said about this is my third experience in an online system. Like, I got a degree online and then I got a certificate online. I've never had relationships like I do with team members, like I do, through Drexel, just working together with projects. So I think that's really good because it just expands our knowledge and our network. So.
Okay. Yeah, and one of the things, in just a couple comments, that remember in 800, what that's designed to do is, if you think back to the iceberg, and in that comment I've said to you before about structure shapes the behavior of people over time, that as you understand the impact that a structure has on individual and collective behavior, that the more you can discern that and then dive into understanding what are the underlying mental models that allow that structure to function. And again, from a school point of view, whether it be a university or K-12 environment or even a business, the structure is found in schedules, it's found in policy, it's found in contractual arrangements. So again, as I always say to the K-12 people who are working under contracts, that remember, a contract is really negotiating the system of work. So when you begin to think about the U in 845, what you're attempting to do is to then do the deeper dive into the structure to surface the mental models, and that's where the generative conversation, the generative listening begins to emerge. And then, as Sharma talked about, when you let go to let come, then the possibilities of the future begin to emerge for you. And that doesn't negate the understanding of current reality, because remember I said to you, that tension between current reality and the vision is always a very powerful metaphor to keep thinking about. And when the vision is strong enough, it will pull current reality forward. When the vision is weak, it will drive current reality to maintain the downloading. So again, think about that, from that point of view. So with that question, then here is the next question that I'd like you now to just talk about, and you started talking about it a little bit in some of your comments. So what did you learn from working in a team environment during the design process? What was going on within your teams?
Well, I think for me, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think for me, it was really nice to see each of us pulling on each other's strengths and working in that way, and really finding one another's strengths and helping one another to highlight those strengths. And it felt really successful. It definitely was a close group work. We were close collaboratively. And I think that because we felt so close with one another and could share what we felt comfortable and more strong about, we could give each other those roles and help support one another.
Okay.
I'll go. Oh, sorry, Carrie, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Stacey.
I was just going to say, I agree, and I believe it was Nicole that said it last time too, the relationships we built. I think automatically there was this amount of trust that we did have confidence in each other's strengths and really could play off of the experiences that everybody had. And so there wasn't that, like, I fear group work, because I remember from undergrad in my master's program where you were like, oh, this is going to take forever. We're not going to get anywhere. And that experience has never happened. I think it's just that confidence in each other's ability and the strengths that each bring, and that we know to accept everybody's idea or challenge it in a positive way that's going to be productive. And so I think that's been really great about this process in general.
Yeah, and I I'm just going to echo that same sentiment. I think having the same kind of that core structure that we had from last time, we knew a decent amount about each other. We kind of fell into the roles and played on each other's strengths, but we trusted each other, I think, more than I've ever trusted other group members in other programs. And there wasn't a fear of, and I'm not sure if it's what we're reading and we're being more open and we're allowing ourselves to be more open to each other's opinions, but we're not afraid to critique each other because no one's being negative. It's all positive critique, and it's supportive, and you're willing to share and ask for help. And what do you think of this? And we're all using technology. So, we're using it to a point where you're sending things back and forth. And how does this look? How should I do? How should I fix this? Does this look good? And we're putting together last night when we were looking at, our final draft, I remember thinking, this looks really professional. I was incredibly impressed with what our group did. And it's really amazing what we did in such a short time.
Okay.
This is Amanda, and I was with Carrie. As we think about this, I wonder if two factors were at play. One is that we're all super busy with other things in life, so we can't afford to slack or twiddle away the time, right? I don't have time to procrastinate. I just have to get this done because I have other things happening in my life. And I think, and not to be Debbie Downer, but I think a lot of us struggled in our other course. And so it helped us bond when we would come together because we could chat quickly about, oh, that other class, right? So like the hazing that's happening, or it's not really hazing, but misery breeds company, or whatever that cliche is. So I think that helped bring us all together a little bit too. And we didn't have group work in that class, so we were free to talk about it in this group as well. So at least our group, we regularly at some point would start talking about the other class.
And then I got you guys for the second part of that other class next quarter.
Sherry's on, by the way. Sorry I'm late.
Okay, good. So,
Hey, I can't see you, but I can hear you guys. I'm in the car on the way to Florida.
oh, that's good. So here's the question that you cannot see. What I'm asking is, what did you learn from working in a team environment during the design process?
You want me to answer it?
If you so desire.
Yeah. So I learned. Well, first of all, I learned so much from each of my group mates. Just about, the intricate knowledge they all have about certain different areas, clearly gaps that I don't have. So that was super helpful. And I also just learned about, we all had unique specializations that we brought to the table. So like the 10 Faces of Innovation book, I almost felt like we each had certain personas there, and we kind of capitalized on our strong points. And, by doing that, we had a really strong group because each of us brought different things to the table.
Okay. So let me ask all of you a question then in terms of this team environment. Did you run into any blockages in terms of maybe disagreements? If you did, how did you resolve those? What were how did leadership emerge within your team?
This is Patty. I don't think our group, and I have a couple other group members on, ran into any major disagreements. I think one of the things that happened throughout the quarter was at certain times someone would kind of get the ball rolling on one particular aspect of the project and get that started and get in touch with everybody. And then someone else would do it at another point based on what was going on in everybody's lives. So that was a really helpful part that people kind of picked up where other people might have been absent for a few days because of, as I said, personal issues they have going on. And I don't think anyone resented that one person might have done a little bit more work this week and then someone else did it another week. So that wasn't necessarily a problem, but it seemed to be a dynamic that worked for us, I think. I don't know if Nicole and Jody agree with that, but.
I agree.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things, and I'll tell you this, that I've been learning about this process, and I think a couple of you touched on it, is that in order, teaming, we always talk about doing teaming, getting kids to work in teams. Parents, a lot of times, don't like a teaming process because, quote, the smarter kids do the work and those kids who aren't as smart, let them do the work for them, etc. And that the problem is, in what I'm hearing you say to me, is that you guys got to a level that understands the nature of what teaming is about, and that the team goal sort of overrides everything, and people know when to step in, when to step out, and then the team gives leeway to individuals either because of other time constraints, etc. Do you think that was relevant to your team when you were working on the development of the prototype?
I don't think we have time for egos at this point. We're adults. Like we have timetables, we have jobs, we have too much to do to worry about. My feelings are hurt, and I feel like I need to be the boss. We all have stuff to get done, and I think that, and being, I'm in a high school, so I'm always pushing for teamwork and seeing what happens, and when, like you said about the parents, and I think if you take away the ego part by making the work intentional and heavy, and here's what you have to do, and you don't have time to mess around, then it's about the work. It's about getting the goal met.
Okay.
I also think our team, the teams work well because there's no competition. We're not competing for first of the class. We all have the same common goal, and we're working together to make sure that our team achieves that goal.
Okay. So the challenge drove the team, not something that who's going to be in first, who's going to be in second, or, there was no competition. The only competition was the team meeting its challenge. Okay. All right. So let's move on to the third question then. So as you begin to think about this, what I'm curious about now, and this gets into the content of the course, and I'll read this. So what did you learn about the relationship between creativity, thinking about Puccio and thinking about Brown and thinking about Kelly, and then particularly thinking about Dan Pink in relationship to motivation? So what did you think about, or what did you learn about that relationship between creativity, and I'm going to put / motivation, and leadership from this project?
What really stood out for me, and I see this a lot in my current work, and I've talked with you about my boss, And there was a very old looking video we also watched with the shopping carts, where they're redesigning the shopping carts, right? And they just abandoned titles and let's just be creative and think. And I think that from the readings and because I'm a collaborator in my innovation persona, that when we all work together as a team to get the goal finished, and it's not about who does what and who's the leader, and I think we are much more creative. And thinking back to our process this quarter, there was one point where our team sort of pivoted and we weren't all on the same page, but we had to get there, and it was okay, and we did it. But it was a team process, and there was no, oh, I'm your mentor, so I'm going to help you do that. Like, I don't need you to be my mentor. I need you to let me be part of this team. I think that was really clear in watching the videos and reading and then thinking about my own work, that the more you can strip away that, at least in creative sessions, the better it works.
So let me ask you then, Amanda, about that. From that experience, then how are you reflecting upon that in relationship to development of your own leadership?
When I read the innovation personas, I was very clearly a collaborator. So I think about the way that I work with my student staff, my RAs, my GAs, and I know it's a lot of we and what do you think, and let me get opinions, and here's our problem, how do we fix it? So whereas in my relationship with my boss, she's much more of like, I'm your mentor, but you're not my mentor because we're like the same experience level. So I get resentful. So it's interesting to look at the two relationships, and then even more examining myself. Like, how do I make sure that we are this team, we're here to help the students have a good experience, to make sure they're safe, they're learning. So yeah, I think it's given me a chance to think, yes, I am this way, but how do I make sure that I'm continuing that?
Okay. Others?
For me, from my personal experience, just making the connection between creativity and leadership. I don't know why I've never thought about this before prior to this course, but it makes so much sense now. I desire to be in a different position with a different leader who helps me grow, and who, my creative side, because in the current situation that I'm in, that person is a manager and there's no leadership, and that through this course, it just became so evident to me.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
One of the things that I didn't think about prior to this course was I just sort of thought that people were either creative or not. And I didn't think about it in terms of creativity being learned and even enhanced. And so that has changed my approach completely as I look at my college students and providing that venue for the creativity to flourish and grow and become enhanced, and that safe environment where people can think outside the box without fear of being wrong. And so changing my view of what creativity is, I think, is going to help me be a better leader, if that makes sense.
Okay. Good.
For me, I think it was also allowing others to express themselves, and kind of keeping in mind that there are no bad ideas, but yet not going into a groupthink scenario where you acquiesce just to get the job done. I really think that open-minded reflection in a group where you're just brainstorming, and then you kind of vacillate through a path together to come to an idea. I think that's something that I really learned, to make sure that I'm keeping an open mind and listening at the levels that we learned about with Schwarmer, and to allow others to express themselves. And it's almost as if the creativity comes almost by osmosis, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah. And it's interesting because you said at your company that that senior management, or at least management, has now been going through design thinking training.
Yeah, that is correct. They're giving all of the CFOs in our company design thinking, because especially in finance, people tend to, when you're trained a specific way, you have one way to look at things in that very analytical silo. And so there's become almost a stagnation, if you will, of business insights and driving the business from a financial perspective because of that. So in order to spur creativity in the way that financial things are done in the organization, they thought that using design thinking would be a way to help us get there.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, and the reason I'm saying interesting to that is Otto's second, not the book that you guys have, but his second book that he did with his wife really gets into the economics of changing the economic structures. So that might be something from, it's called From an Ecosystem to a Ecosystem. That's his second book, and that one I would strongly recommend, particularly to people who are in the financial area, where he's doing a lot of talking about changing economic structures. So just a point of reference for you.
Oh,
for me, For me, it's really interesting because my husband, I don't know if you know it, but he worked at Frog Design for 5 years, and he started working there a decade ago. Now he's at Method. But it's so interesting because watching him lead the design thinking process and taking part of it, I really wanted to bring it to our school. And now they're finally, you know how education's always the last. We're finally, using it at our schools, which is really exciting in the last year or so. And then the other thing I wanted to say with creativity and leadership, I found like the secret to success as a teacher a few years ago when I realized that as long as you're meeting with a parent and you explain that you care so much about their child and you want what's best for their child, then together you can do anything. And so I think it's the same thing with our teamwork and our approach, like the idea that we're all on the same page and we all have the same main goal and lends us to be like working so well together. Like nothing else matters, nothing else can get in the way, like because we all have that same altruistic goal of like doing the best we can and designing something as a team.
Okay, good. Anyone else on this particular question? What you're finding about the leadership, relationship between creativity and leadership?
Well, just following up on what Nicole had said earlier, I'm finding that in this course, I'm wanting better for myself, and I'm expecting more out of the managers or executives that I report to. And, I've kind of vented to some of my other peers about what had been going on in my job. And, I had introduced a different idea, something that went against the norm. And as somebody at my level, somebody that's new to the nonprofit sector, it wasn't welcome because everybody was stuck on titles. Well, you're the new kid on the block. You can only have so much say. And, the new idea was perceived as being, combative more than helpful to the overall goal of the nonprofit achieving their mission and all that. And after experiencing that, I'm like, I want better. And the things that, in working on our teams, we all had very different ideas on what a successful school looked like, but we weren't so caught up in our own, our own expertise that we weren't able to hear each other. So it really blew my mind how, I can work with 4 or 5 other people, across, the world, across the country, and conversation be just fine. Everybody's in tune with what the goal is, but the individuals that I work with on a regular 9 to 5 are just not, they're just not in tune. And it has, of course, introduced a job change for me, and I'm happier. But I have to say, I don't think I would have really looked at my career differently, or even my personal growth, if it wasn't for this particular project and just going, just moving through this program. So, I mean, you can't separate, creativity and leadership. You really need one to be successful with the other. And it does take, abandoning, those titles or suspending our judgment in order to really, really be open to a new idea or thought.
Yeah, and as you were talking about that, I was thinking about it from a point of view of, again, thinking about structure, thinking about downloading, and remember that the opposite of presencing is absencing. Mm-hmm. And that's a very important concept to keep in mind, because the mindset, when you think about presencing, you're looking at open mind, open heart, and open will. And when you look at absencing, you're basically looking at closed mind, closed heart, and a closed will. And it is us versus them.
Right.
Those silos or the hierarchies of rank then take on much more importance, which then blocks the possibility of generative conversation. So even though you're a new kid on the block, yeah, okay, I'm bringing in some interesting ideas, but that structure is designed to maintain habitual behavior and downloading. So it's a good example that you're raising as it relates to those concepts.
Yeah, it's so crazy because I went through, the interview process, and it's like, you're the expert that we're looking for in this field, but now that you're in this situation, we only want you to contribute this much.
Yeah.
Like, we're happy that you're bringing this much to the table, but we only want you to contribute this much.
Yeah.
And, I'm like, well, okay, millennial, that question, well, what's in it for me? But also, what are we really doing here?
Yeah, interesting.
So.
Okay, so any other comments about this one before we go to the last question? All right, so let me move to the last question. So that question is then, through the design activity, what did you discover about blind spots related to your leadership development? So what blind spots emerged for you that as you reflect back on this, really stuck out for you?
I'll go. This is Stacy. I think for me, a lot of it has to do with the lens I look through leadership at. So I work in student affairs, and so I'm focused on college student development, mostly first years, and then supervising staff. So I think having to, particularly for this project, having to think about in the classroom and what it means to develop students in a classroom setting, and then developing a curriculum around that, which is very different for me. And so I relied heavily on my colleagues and my group mates who had that experience, who could sort of look at it that way, while I looked at this project from the overall aspect, like our mission statement and how things would work on the student services side of things, and really relied on them. But it made me think that this program is not a student affairs program, and so I have to be more open-minded about education as a whole, and really start to investigate some ways to learn more about those things.
Okay. So what did you discover about your blind spots?
So I'll go. This is Sherry.
Okay.
Similar to the comments before about the nonprofit, I think what I discovered about my blind spot was my ability to influence when I'm in that us versus them position, to change my own mindset to it's not me versus them, but to work around that and try to influence from the perspective of, let's have an enterprise mindset, or it's about our patients and it's about our doctors and, caring for the world and our company, and that's what we do. And so this should really be our focus. So to the point made before, what are we really doing? Are we really doing what's best for the enterprise and for sustainability and for our patients, and to remind others and influence others versus shut down? Because I think before I would shut down, or I would not give up, but maybe go on to something else. But if I know something's right, or I feel very passionate about it, I think I am learning to really focus on the influencing skills.
Okay.
And that questioning, right? That deep questioning that we did in the interviewing, kind of using that in meetings to open people up more and maybe help them see things differently. I don't know if that makes sense, but that was like, I think, my blind spot before, and I'm really working on that.
Okay, good. Others, when you think about your own blind spots or what you discovered possibly as a blind spot.
So one of my blind spots is, or I know it's there, one of my biases is against business culture and business everything. I work in the shadow of Wharton, and you don't get more business than that. And so having to look at some of the things, and I emailed you in the middle of the quarter about how does some of this work for women, and when you look at Silicon Valley and some of the horrible sexual harassment stuff that's coming out of Uber, and how does this all work? And so, but then reading about Roe and being like, okay, I think that might be interesting. And so knowing that, like, you have this piece of, you don't like what they do and you feel like it's too money hungry and it leaves behind people who aren't in the majority. And so silencing that as we go through, because so much of the curriculum relates so much to business and what they're doing and how can that be applied. And that goes back to, I forgot who said education, we always do things last. There's much more chance to be innovative, I think, in some areas of business because it drives a profit. So I know that's a blind spot for me. And this, I just keep having to say, like, stop it, just think about it. Maybe it's okay. Maybe it's all right.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting one, because I even look at myself around that, because in terms of trying to create learning spaces for leadership, my attention is becoming more focused because of a blind spot on female leadership. But one of the things I discover is it's hard to find things. There are things out there, but it's hard to find things about that, because I think of what you just said is that there has been a natural, it's been a male-dominated component. When you think about the quote gurus of leadership development, there's a couple, but the one that comes to always mind is Margaret Wheatley, who did quite a bit of work and does from Harvard on leadership development as a female voice. And I think that that's something particularly, I'm trying to become much more aware of myself in relationship to finding more examples of that for the classes, because of the amount of females who are in the program. So yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that is becoming more and more important. And I think the other day, I don't know if it's the Wall Street Journal the other day, they did have an article about the number of female CEOs that are emerging. And I think that's important. And that hopefully will change the culture of organizations, as long as they haven't been, structured around a point of view that a leader's got to be like, the general or the male role model of what leadership is, get tough, get in your face, and all those things.
I think one of my blind spots has always been just because of of experience is that in most group activities, one person becomes the leader, and then you have a bunch of followers, and it just becomes that natural rhythm. And so, it was that's a blind spot for me, because it's either I'm the leader or I'm the follower. And if I'm the follower, sometimes I feel like I'm just blindly going along with whatever the leader wants me to do. So this particular design activity was an act almost in breaking that blind spot for me, because it didn't work that way. So I guess for me, it was removing that blind spot. So now I know that doesn't have to exist, because nobody was just blindly leading a follower. So I think for this design activity, that was my movement in leadership development, is taking that blind spot away.
Yeah, and what I think is important about that is we give a lot of lip service and a lot of buzzwords towards distributive leadership throughout an organization. But I think, Carrie, your statement there is that for a lot of organizations, the blind spot is, we got the leaders and we have followers, and that's the way it is, because that's how hierarchical organizations work. And I think your awareness of that, and for all of you, that's part of that, going back to that third question about the interrelationship between creativity and leadership. And then you also think about Dan Pink's writings, that those are very critical areas that I hope you take away and think about, particularly with this idea of distributive leadership. So that's a good point that you brought up. So any other reflections, about blind spots or any of the other questions now as we wrap up this process?
I have something. Maybe this will be a blind spot. So I'm a public educator. I've been a public educator. I truly believe in public education. But recently I'm thinking that might not be the answer to all, because there might be other ways to learn. So I think this project, along with just some of the readings and everything, has helped me just realize that there might be other answers out there for our students.
Yeah. It's a good point.
I'll tell you one that I'm struggling with, and I'm still working on it. A lot of leaders that I work with, and I put that in quotes, are there due to tenure. And I don't really necessarily see the skill sets there that we've been reading about in the creativity space, nor the leadership space. And I hate to say it that way. So I have to open my mind a little bit more and really look at what they do bring to the table, rather than writing them off and saying, oh, they've been here 35 years, so that's where they are. So I'm still struggling with that, but I'm working on it.
I don't want to make a political statement, but it's kind of interesting, because I think the entire country is in that mode right now. To tell you the truth, talk about blind spots. So I couldn't help myself. So after watching Comey all day today, it's very interesting.
Especially, so that's what I struggle with in the corporate world.
Yeah, but it is interesting, and not to make light of this, is that we are in a very interesting transitional space around the concept of what leadership is and what the expectation of leadership is, whether it be in public school education, whether it be in government, whether it be in business world, NGOs, or whatever you have, that the ability to, think outside the box and even think, and again, I'm not being political about this, but it's kind of interesting that there seemed to have been such a mistrust of the typical downloading of the organizational structures that we have in place, whether it be governmental organizations or any types of institution, that what happened was we were willing to take a chance to break out of that mold. So look at France right now. It's kind of interesting where they elected a person that he's really had no governmental experience, but has, the French people said, wait a second, we need to begin to think differently. And we basically did the same thing, in this country in terms of the election, regardless of all of the, clutter that's going around it, that they're almost, it goes back to Sharma. If you remember in the beginning of the book where he's talking about these tectonic shifts that are taking place, he went back to the Berlin Wall falling down, the economic crisis, etc., that there is a shift in thinking about how we should be dealing with the complexities of the issues that are coming in front of us, both a global point of view, but as a regional point of view and a local point of view. So I just think it's interesting when you think about blind spots and reactions to blind spots and what we're willing to attempt to do to maybe go outside the box, but then again, there's consequences every time you do that. So if you're going to change public school, a lot of the fear from parents, and I know this as a superintendent who attempted to change schools, once successful, once not, is that we run into those issues around whether or not you have the infrastructure behind you to make these things happen. So if you think about your projects and the degree of how far they've gone outside the box, again, like I asked you to think about is, okay, what becomes the implementation strategy of that, which becomes a critical issue. And most times the implementation strategy has a lot to do with surfacing the language that we use and what's behind that language, what's behind the metaphors, in order to get people to be willing to let go of the past in order to see possibilities of the future. So it's just, it's interesting as we think about what's happening in this country, what's happening in other countries, and even in England today, it looks like the conservatives have lost the majority. That they lost over, I think the last thing I saw was about 34 seats, or the Labour Party increased by 34 seats and Labour lost, so now there's a minority government. So that ebb and flow of change and our willingness to look at new possibilities, I think, as Sharma talks about, is really a worldwide phenomenon right now. So it's just something, I think you should think about as you look at yourselves as emerging leaders and as you look at what's going on around us, because why that's important to understand that both from your own personal point of view, but as educators and as business people, it's also important to understand it because it influences, particularly educators, it's influencing that next generation to think about what's happening. So it was interesting, I forget who said it, well, as a millennial, I bring in these ideas. So we've already, looked at those differences in relationship to age and perspectives. So the question is, how do we come to a common understanding of points of view so we can move forward? That's just something I was thinking about as we were talking about, blind spots in some of our statements. So with that, why don't we end at this particular point? I will obviously, once I get all your your projects in, I'll give comments back to the teams. Let me stop the share. And what I do want to do